Some people call them worms or whatever, but they kind of look like brains. Or intestines if you want to get really disgusting about it. What we're going to do is a yellow base on there for the brains that we're going to build up on, and I already loaded my gun up with some yellow. I'm not concerned with the black here on the edge because we're still going to have a drop shadow up in that area. So I'm just going to come in with my yellow, and again, I'm not that worried about even coverage because it's just going to be a subtle coloring. The most of the design of the brains itself is going to be done with that red oxide color. And actually, remember I mentioned don't do little swiggles, go out in straight lines. That was for the metal. When you're working with something that's more organic, you can kind of be a little bit more chaotic. Has a real splotchy texture to it, but that's actually going to work in the long run by giving a real interesting texture in the background of the brains. So our next step is we're going to clean out the yellow, and we're going to go right to our transparent red oxide. Okay, I got my airbrush with the red oxide in it. Just a little test spray to make sure it's spraying okay. Then we're going to start laying out the actual brain design. Now, on the brains, you want a very fine line to start with, and you want it fairly faint. Notice I took the cap off again. And I'm going to start out just with a single line, and I'm going to stop it. Then I kind of come out and keep an equidistance from the other line. I create a line that kind of goes around, and I'll stop that one. And what it actually is, if you remember when you were younger and you used to make mazes and stuff in high school and junior high or whatever, you actually don't draw the actual path, you're drawing the wall. Same thing with this brain design. We're actually drawing in the negative space. And I don't want to lose anyone here with any of this long hair artistic talk, but negative space is literally just the opposite of the positive. Positive space would be the actual brain itself. We're creating the folds in between. And we're making it kind of random. Don't go back and forth all the way across. Otherwise it has a tendency of looking a little planned. Remember, with this you have a pattern, but with a natural or anything organic, you're going to have a little bit of chaos involved in the actual design. Let this one kind of go off and do a little double thing here. Remember, this area is masked off up in here, even though it looks like it's not. As you see, we got the pattern all laid in here really faintly, and they're looking a little bit like brains, but they're kind of rough. At this point, once I get the whole design laid in, you want to finish one corner first, because then you'll end up getting the design off balance. I'm going to come to each of the ends and I create a little dot. Now what this dot in actuality is when whatever this is, brains, intestines, guts, whatever, when it folds around, it's going to create a crease, a series of wrinkles that are predominantly on every end of these little lines. So this gives you a starting point to start doing the wrinkles. And all I'm going to do now, really, after I do those dots all in there, I come in and I start laying in wrinkle. I darken up the lines, of course, too, because I really want to start punching the lines out. And I lay in the wrinkles. And you're going to have a few gaps here and there. That's okay. What I mean by gaps are these areas where there's no brains in the middle. We're going to darken those up. Notice I continue these little lines faintly. I started the design out very lightly and I continue darkening it. Now if I started darkening right away, it may seem like I would have been saving time. But in actuality, I probably would have made some mistakes I would have had to pay for by coming back in and respraying with yellow. By starting out lightly and continually bringing in and darkening when I'm painting, while it may take a little bit longer, I won't make mistakes, and if I do, I can see them and correct them before they really mess up my piece. Notice how from here to this, just slowly rendering and building up layers. And I continue on to the rest of it. As you can see, we got all the line work and the wrinkles all laid in there. And to add a little bit more texture, I'm going to do that flick trick we talked about. Remember, you pull the trigger back, let the paint load up, and I end up with little stipples of the tangerine root beer color all over the brains. This adds a texture, kind of makes it look even more eroded. I figure since I left the diamond plate alone and didn't erode it too much, I'm going to mess these brains up a whole lot. And I've got the red oxide in here. I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt blue. Now, cobalt blue is really close to a purple almost, and I'm going to add just a few drops in there of it. This is the candy concentrate, so you don't need much. And what it's going to do is it's going to actually darken up this red oxide. As you see, we had a little bit too much blue in there. That happens. Just spilled out a little bit and put it back in my tangerine until I could get back my color. Now see, this is the original tangerine. Now I've got, oh, I've got a muddy brown color. And that comes from like the violet blue and the tangerine mixing together. This is the exact color I want. What I'm going to do with this color is I'm going to come in and just emphasize the corner wrinkles and that center area. Still a little bit thick. Again, the nice thing about these top feeds, you can always add a little bit more reducer. Doesn't hurt it. Give it a good shake and a blast. Much nicer, much nicer. And come in and do these little thin, wispy folds right at the end of the creases. Remember where those little balls were we put at the end of the little dots we put at the end of those lines? We're not redoing all the lines. I don't want you to go back and reinvent the wheel by painting over all the stuff you've already painted. We're just emphasizing the creases to make the brain part. We want the light area to come forward and the dark area to recede, which is the gap in between. You notice I jump around a lot when I'm painting. That's just force of habit, but it also prevents me from focusing too much on one area. Whenever I'm painting something that's random mechanic, I try and paint the same style. A couple more folds in that corner there. And what we do is we're pushing back the gap in between these brains to really make them, to give it a rounded look. As you see, we've got all of the dark lines finished in there, and I got a little bit of white in my micron now. And all I'm going to do is come in very lightly. You see, it's almost like a little squiggle. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a slight highlight on the very apex of the curve of these brains, guts, whatever you want to call it. Every now and then clearing the tip to make sure it doesn't spit at me. Even though, in this case, any spitting with the airbrush actually look kind of good. But what it gives is that almost a glistening, wet look. These brains. I don't mean to gross anybody out here, but we are trying to get an effect. So every now and then blow the airbrush out, because what happens when you're airbrushing very fine details like this up close, you'll have a tendency of building up layers of paint on the needle, and eventually they'll build up so big they'll actually just blow off as a big spot. So I always take a little break and kind of blow it off. One additional use for that masking tape all around your piece. And we're going to do these to all the brains. All of them right in the center is going to have this nice little wet highlight. You can kind of hear it when it's about ready to spit. The sound of the air will either start whistling or change pitch on you. And watch out. That means something's going to happen. Okay, we finished up all the highlights in here, and one of the last steps we're going to come in with is the black again. I actually just add a little bit of black to that transparent cobalt blue tangerine color we were using, and all I'm doing is very lightly coming in and putting that drop shadow back in, because we kind of lost it with the yellow and with the highlights. Not too dark. I don't want to make it pitch black. Remember, a shadow is not necessarily black. It's just the same color as what's there, just a little bit less light. Now we're going to pull back the masking tape and see what we've got underneath. You should have a nice broken edge or cut edge of that diamond plate over the brains. There we go. I'm going to come back with my white